Okay, so we are going to start with 2.4 chemical reactions. So, a chemical reaction is so every process that takes place in an organism, it depends on chemical reactions. So, what is a chemical reaction? A chemical reaction is the process of breaking down and forming new chemical bonds, and so it changes substances into different substances. So one substance, the bonds of that one substance gets broken down, and it changes into another new substance. So the original substance that gets broken down is called the reactant. The reactant is the original substance, and throughout the chemical reaction, the reactant is a thing that changes. And the product, like in math, is the result of that chemical reaction. So it's what comes out after the chemical reaction has happened. So in chemical reactions, the bonds needs to break in order to form new bonds. And so those bonds break and form new bonds, which forms the product, which forms the outcome. And all chemical reactions involve changes in energy. So energy needs to be added to the reactants in order for these chemical reactions to actually happen. So if you look here, these two hydrogen molecules, H2H2, combines with two oxygens and they become water. So hydrogen and oxygen, these two are what we call reactants. And so the bonds break, the bonds between the hydrogens break, the bonds between the oxygens break, and they reform to make the products, which is water. This is a chemical reaction. Now, next, we're going to learn about bond energy. So bond energy is the amount of energy needed in order to break a bond between atoms. When when breaking the bond, energy needs to be added. So if you think about it, we have to think about it in our perspective. If we're trying to break something, we need to add energy to that thing. It's not that that energy is receiving that thing is receiving energy from us, but we have to look at it from our point of view. So if we look at it, we need to add energy to that thing in order to break the bond. So breaking the bond requires energy. And the thing about this is that so if there's a different atom, different amounts of energies are needed. So it takes different amount of energies to break a pencil and to break a stick. So depending on the type of atom, the amount of energy needed to break that bond differs. Now, when forming the bond releases energy. You can think of this as kind of like resting. When we rest, we gain energy. And also, and another example is like a fire. The bonds are formed, but it releases heat energy. So, forming the bond, it releases energy. And so the bonds in the reactants break, so energy is added to the reactants and it forms the products. So it makes new bonds and it forms the product.